When Animal Crossing New Horizons first came out, I was taken in by it immediately. Such beautiful graphics, amazing music, the ability to pretty much just be a god over an island and all of its inhabitants, what's not to like? Despite removing quite a bit of the catalog, furniture still felt pretty extensive with options. You could eventually lay out your island however you wanted, and you could pretty much handpick your animal neighbors, decide where they live, and make sure they never, ever move away. But the more I played, even though I only sat down with it for about the first 2 months before moving on to other games, the more I was finding myself becoming disenchanted with the experience. I'll be going over what didn't work for me very well as I talk about what I hope we might see in the next game. To preface, I've been a fan of the series ever since the original on the GameCube. Every new release I went and snatched the game right up ASAP, and every game gave me something to love. The original was refreshing, new, and I loved meeting all the various animals as they insulted me and told me to do their chores. Wild World let me bring my town with me anywhere and was the first to adopt the rolling pin style map. City Folk and New Leaf was a precursor to New Horizons as far as town customization goes, allowing you to commission and place projects around town. Every new game felt like a natural progression of the last game, and New Horizons became what felt to be the culmination of the past 19 years worth of games. Over time, we saw some staple characters grow, we got introduced to their relatives who would then become mainstays themselves, your role in the town would become bigger and more important, and Tortimer would die somewhere off screen. As Nintendo gave me, the player, more and more to do though, I never stopped to notice that the animals in the game, half the title of the franchise, would consequently have less and less agency and personality. Which is ironic because they also became more complex through programmed systems such as hobbies. But I'll get into that in the last bit of my video because the animals are what I have the most to say about. First off, let's talk about something simple. Nintendo, let us have save files. Like at least 2 or 3. Part of me understands why every single mainline Animal Crossing game only has one save slot. On the GameCube, Animal Crossing alone took up an entire memory card. The game literally shipped with its own memory card to make sure you could actually save your game. Aside from the large file size, Animal Crossing has always been a social experience that encourages people to play together, even if the act of doing that has often been pretty difficult. As a result, Animal Crossing has always been an essentially single-player game that nonetheless encourages multiplayer, but has never really done multiplayer in a truly accessible and engaging way. This will be another point I'll come back to in a bit. As a single-player game, Animal Crossing has always been more accessible than most. The onboarding process of each new game sends you through a well-paced tutorial that gives you most of the necessary information you'll need to get by, but also leaves some aspects of the game up in the air to encourage you to experiment, or maybe talk with some friends in real life to learn what they've experienced and see what tips they may have. I'd actually say that New Horizons does the worst job with this tutorial, considering both I and many others I know found themselves stuck at various points unsure of what to do next. It seemed a little too insistent on loosening the reins and letting us go experiment on our own. Looping this back around to the please let us have multiple save files point, Animal Crossing has always only ever given the full tutorial to the first person to play the game. As a matter of fact, the first person who plays the game enjoys quite a few perks that subsequent second, third, and fourth players are just completely barred from, and it's an issue that's only gotten worse over time. In Animal Crossing for GameCube, the one that gives the player the least power over the town, there's actually not much of a difference in the gameplay experience for the first player in relation to every subsequent player. Everyone starts off with their own house, gets run through the same tutorial, and is allowed to have largely the same experience. The only potential difference is that the first player has most likely filled out at least some of the museum already, and for all players, Nook Shop is a first come first served deal, so you had to coordinate with your fellow players who was allowed to buy what at his shop every new day. Otherwise, honestly, the original Animal Crossing and City Folk handle player 2 through 4 experiences the absolute best of any game of the franchise, because player 1 doesn't inherently get any actual advantages over them. Wild World is the first time we see the non-player 1 experience get a little wonky, primarily because every human player not only shares the same town, they share the same house. To compensate, Wild World increases the number of house upgrades you can get, going from just the first floor room, the second floor room, and the basement, to the main first floor room, an east wing, a north wing, a west wing, and a second floor. They got rid of the basement, but replaced it with a universal storage system, since that's what the basement was originally intended for anyway. What this means is that 4 players can potentially all have their own personal rooms and share the main room on the first floor, but if, say, one player fully upgraded and furnished the entire house, and then another player wants to join in, unless the original player is willing to give up some of the rooms they decorated themselves, those new players are going to be hopping into a game where they don't really get to experience one of the main draws of it, starting fresh with almost nothing in your living space and slowly personalizing it. Add to that the possibility that the museum might be pretty well stocked by now, so the primary reason for the new player to collect anything would be to get bells. But if they have no debt to spend the bells on and no furniture to decorate with, maybe that leaves clothes to buy? And even then, the other player might have already gotten a bunch of clothes and put them in storage. So without the incentive to buy and upgrade anything, there's not going to be much of a point for the player to participate unless they just really like fishing, bug hunting, and talking to the animals a lot. It's in New Leaf though where we see the first instance of actual in-game mechanics and power dynamics affect the non-player 1 experience. Thankfully, each player does get their own house again, and unlike the previous games, each player actually gets to choose where they set up their starter tent, which is nice. However, the tutorial process for player 1 versus every other player is different, because only player 1 gets to be the mayor. Yes, New Leaf is Animal Crossing's first time experimenting with letting the player have control over how their town looks via various projects that can be commissioned and placed wherever the player would like. And they can enact ordinances which impact how the town operates, like having stores open and close earlier or later. But only player 1 is allowed to do this. The extent to what the other players can do in this regard is donate bells for the completion of the project so they happen faster. This, however, is just a precursor to New Horizons, which makes the experience for player 2 and beyond even worse. Now, you'd think the Switch would provide a way for you to circumvent the one save file issue. For every other game that I know on the Switch, if you boot the game up on a second profile, that will open up a brand new save file. You can do this with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you can do it with the Pokemon games, etc. But Animal Crossing New Horizons only allows one island per console, and switching between profiles simply logs you in as whatever human villager is attached to that profile. So how is New Horizons even worse than New Leaf for anybody who's not the first one to move onto the island? New Horizons is the game that affords the player the most control over nearly every aspect of their town. When you start on your island, there is almost nothing. You have yourself, 2 villagers, a resident services tent that lets you buy a scant amount of items, and an airport that doesn't do anything until you progress in the story a little bit. Over time, you're allowed to fully experience the tutorial, which tells you most of the stuff about the game you'll need to know, invite villagers to live on your town with certainty that they'll move in, place buildings, bridges, and staircases wherever you like, progress a story that slowly unlocks everything in the game. There's not really much of a story so much as there is a series of objectives, upgrade buildings, and terraform pathways, cliffs, and waterways. As you've probably guessed by how I preface this list though, you can only do any of these things if you're the island representative, aka the first person to play a new copy of the game. Even the tutorial is stripped down drastically for everyone who wasn't first, leaving people who may have never picked up an Animal Crossing in their lives really confused about what to ever be doing. Considering New Horizons allows up to 8 people to live on the same island, it feels rather cruel for Nintendo to make the core conceit of the game be about the customization and personalization of an entire town, only to have every aspect of its progression and aesthetic hinge on one person. Which just reinforces my statement that Animal Crossing is a single-player game that tries to encourage multiplayer, but kind of fails at it. And what's funny is that playing as the second player or beyond in New Horizons is basically the same as what it's like to play the original Animal Crossing. You don't have agency over where things are or how your town is laid out or really much of anything. But playing this game knowing there's so much more to it and you're just not allowed to do it is what makes it pretty rough. Having multiple save files per game could remedy all of this. Every player on a console could have their own town and have the option to create characters in their housemates' towns so they can have an experience at a location that isn't their own. Even for solitary players, it could be nice to just experiment with a second or even a third town without having to dedicate themselves to starting all over again. Considering Animal Crossing is intended to be played in real time, the games all wind up asking you for a lot of your time in order to create a home you feel you can be proud of. So if you decide you want to start fresh and experience the game again from the beginning, your only option being erase your entire game is a hefty asking price. Now, yes, you can definitely cut down on time spent by just time traveling, adjusting your system's internal clock to whatever you want it to be, so starting over could go by more quickly that way, but imagine you built a town up to pretty much the level of perfection you'd always dreamed of, and now you want to try a different aesthetic. Wouldn't it be swell if you could preserve your existing town and have another town you can start up as your new project? Wouldn't it be nice, Nintendo, if we could play your game and customize in different ways without having to entirely wipe out hours upon hours of progress? Just give us 2 or 3 save files next time, please, I'm begging you over here. Games inside of the game. Whatever happened to the NES games they put in the original Animal Crossing? Yeah, in Animal Crossing for the GameCube, you could find emulated versions of classic NES games and just play them, in full. There was a collection of entire NES games inside Animal Crossing, and they just haven't been a thing since the first one. Why? One of Animal Crossing's biggest weaknesses, in my opinion, is that after the first few weeks of playing, there's just not a terribly good amount of stuff to keep you genuinely occupied. This has been an issue for the entire series. You start off playing for hours a day, getting to know your town, finding things to donate to your museum, crossing your fingers that a piece of furniture you've been hunting down will be available, gaining bells to afford that furniture, and paying off your debt. You're spending a lot of time building your house and your town. This can definitely take a while, but once you hit that point where you've done everything you set out to do, it's hard to find any incentive to come back outside of to participate in special events. Outside of fishing, bug catching, maybe landscaping, talking to and occasionally doing chores for neighbors and buying things, you're really not doing much. New Horizons definitely gives you the most to do of any of the games, what with adding the crafting mechanic and letting you completely change the island however you please, but everything you do boils down to chores at the end of the day. Even the most exciting bit of the game, terraforming, depends on you having an idea in the first place, and then the patience to work with the tools the game gives you to make that idea a reality. What I'm getting at is, Animal Crossing could stand to give us more to do. They actually made a decent step in the right direction with Nook Miles and New Horizons, encouraging us to do a few specific things on any given day. What comes to mind for me is more like hide and seek, which was introduced in City Folk and brought back for New Leaf, but was, for some reason, removed in New Horizons as far as I know. Players get around this by just having real friends come over and they play it themselves, but with how long traveling takes in New Horizons, you probably could have finished multiple hide and seek sessions by the time you get all your friends to your island. Why they removed hide and seek from New Horizons as an interaction with your villagers is a mystery to me, as I always found the game to be a fun diversion from my rotation of find the money rock, harvest trees, visit the shop, then maybe fish and or bug hunt. And there's so much potential to go so much further than that. In the later games, animals began to operate on a hobby system. As a result, you'd often see them hanging around town carrying a water pail or a fishing rod or whatever hobby they were into at the time. I think it would be great if every villager could engage in a minigame with you based on whatever current hobby they're into. For instance, they like fishing? How about they invite you to their secret fishing spot, where they know a certain fish likes to hang out and you race to catch it, or see how many of that specific fish you can catch in a specific time. Or they quiz you by showing you several different fish and you have to accurately identify them for a prize. Or you participate in a sort of instance game where you get to man captain's boat and go net fishing out in the ocean and see what you get. There's a lot of opportunity for things like this to happen. Have villagers be able to play tag with you. Let there be races around the town. Let us participate in a tug of war and play soccer and volleyball with actual structure and points and prizes. I'm actually getting a lot of these ideas from the sports fairs in the original Animal Crossing, where, for the most part, only the animals are able to participate and you more or less just get to watch. Another great way to bring back an older mechanic and improve on it is to try having a city again, but actually make it at least as big as your town this time, though preferably bigger, and have designated areas where you can go to play some sports. Also, in the city area, it would be nice to have an arcade where you can actually play all the functionless machines you've been able to buy throughout the series' history. They don't have to be full-on NES games like the original. Give us a simple Mario-like game where Mario is like a rabbit or something because he jumps a bunch. There's even a whole other game that exists on the Switch where there's a rabbit version of Mario, so there's even a precedent for it. Or you can have an established Animal Crossing character suddenly get into game development and self-insert themselves into every game they make. I'm already imagining an arcade full of games designed by Red, where he's the hero in all of them, which could also make sense for the character since arcade games are built for you to sink money into them constantly. I think having a wider variety of things to do, and perhaps a dedicated hub in which to do them, could help tremendously with the eventual monotony of the game. And of course incentivize all of this with various rewards. Like you win a few thousand bells or a special piece of clothing or something for playing basketball. Or Red rewards you with his bevy of now only authentic art pieces for playing his games enough times. Would those also eventually become stale? Yeah, probably. But when we've had 20 years of largely the same gameplay loop out of the series, at least it would help freshen things up a bit, I think. Simple quality of life improvements. It feels strange to say, but New Horizons has definitely done the most as far as quality of life goes in the franchise. And it feels strange to say that because there are still so many things that are needlessly archaic and get in the way. Like, why is it I can only choose between buying 1 or buying 5 of something? And if I want to buy any other amount, I have to go through the same interaction more than once. When I want to craft one thing multiple times, why do I have to go through every dialogue box for each individual instance instead of just saying I'd like to craft 4 of this please? Why does the entire process of going to, arriving at, and leaving someone else's island take so long? Animal Crossing is a very slow-paced game, and I understand it's intentionally built that way. But these kinds of things harken back to the feeling of tedium. Once you've been around the block for a while and have seen the same dialogue boxes dozens or hundreds of times and their novelty has long since worn off, It feels like much more of a chore to get through them than anything. I think a couple little things that could potentially help with this is something many other games already do to streamline the experience. I mean, one of them is obvious. When we want to buy or make stuff, let us simply specify how much we want instead of forcing us to do things 1 or 5 at a time. Another thing is to give common vendors like Nook or Wilbur generally less dialogue when you talk to them beyond the first time. Instead of asking us what we'd like to do, let us approach them and immediately open up an option box that lets us select a series of things to do, and then let them reiterate it to us at the end to confirm. For instance, if I want to fly to a friend's island, let me select I want to visit someone, select Wi-Fi, choose from the list. Then Wilbur can be like, looks like you're wanting to hitch a flight to Coney Island, did I get that right? And then you can just say yes and subsequently be on your way. Yes, in that moment, it can reduce Wilbur's personality by giving him much less to say, but in all honesty, once you're talking to him for the 20th time, you're already not paying attention to him anymore anyway. And besides, a later point I'll get to can potentially help offset characters like Wilbur feeling like a mere function as opposed to a character. The point here is, please Nintendo, streamline the next Animal Crossing by cutting back on the dialogue boxes. Simple changes can make such a world of difference. Multiplayer. Like I said before, Animal Crossing has a troubled relationship with multiplayer, especially considering how much of a focus they put on community. Playing games online with friends is so common nowadays that it's baffling to me why Animal Crossing, and honestly Nintendo in general, feels so needlessly archaic in handling online multiplayer. Namely, why does it take like 30 years to have one person come visit you? And once that person is in your town, why are you suddenly just completely unable to do so many things? You can't place, move, or remove furniture at all. You can't donate anything to the museum. The resident services building doesn't let you do like half of the functions. Even the animals running the shops in the resident services building don't move around or do anything anymore. They just stand still in one spot staring at you. Having guests over, weirdly, makes it feel like you're temporarily just not allowed to do anything in the game anymore, except fish and catch bugs and harass your visiting friend. And even when interacting with your friends, there's just not really anything to do. They can run around your town to have a look at it, visit your neighbors, you can trade stuff and maybe play hide and seek, but there's really not much game happening when visitors are around. Sometimes when I have friends over, after a while, I just want to kick them out because I want to go decorate stuff and terraform, and Nintendo won't let me because my friends are existing in my space. Just like the games inside of the Game Point, I think it would be amazing if there was a host of programmed multiplayer games that you could play with your friends. Invite out-of-towners over and you can all go hit up that city and visit the arcade or visit the bowling alley or something. Or if you have a voice chat up and running, I don't know, go to the high-end restaurant that has realistically paced service and order 15,000 bell escargot while you chat it up with your friends. Let us go to Dr. Strunk's comedy club that doubles as KK's nightclub and watch a comedy performance or play a dancing minigame. Animal Crossing is a life simulator game. Let us do things with friends that we would do in real life. You know, when a global pandemic isn't happening. Hanging out in town just kind of shooting the breeze in a completely unstructured setting can be nice, but Animal Crossing being a life simulator that tries to incorporate multiplayer in real time puts it in a very unique situation that has so many possibilities. There's a whole persistent, cutesy alternate reality populated by talking animals that we can do stuff with. Just give us stuff to actually do and make it an accessible experience. Finally, the actual animals. So in my opinion, the animals themselves are a huge part of the draw of the series. Yes, being able to decorate your house and eventually your entire town is also very fun, but alongside the excitement of finally getting that elusive furniture you've been waiting for, there has always been that feeling of wonder about which neighbors you're going to get next. Animal Crossing As of New Horizons has 391 villagers, and that's not even counting the returning series mainstays like Blathers and the Able Sisters. The vast majority of these animals have been present in the series ever since the very first game, so people who have been playing since the beginning may have even had a favorite in the GameCube Animal Crossing that they do their best to move back into their town in every new game. Over time though, the animals have started to suffer from a rather strange problem. They're all excessively nice now and they no longer have any agency in their own lives. In every Animal Crossing game, except for the main staple recurring characters like Nook, every single animal has only one of 8 personality types, which is technically only 4 since they're split in half by gender. Male personalities are cranky, jock, lazy, and smug, and female personalities are snooty, preppy, normal, whatever that means, and sisterly. Every pair of personalities is basically the equivalent of one another. So cranky and snooty are pretty much the same, as are smug and sisterly, normal and lazy, and peppy and jock. Cranky and snooty villagers are always more snobbish and arrogant, and while they'll warm up to you eventually, they'll still talk to you as if they're above you. Sisterly and smug are caring and kind and almost seem to coddle you. Normal and lazy are very chilled out and nice. Peppy and jock are, again, pretty dang friendly, but sometimes come off as overly competitive and childish. So ultimately, it's only really cranky and snooty villagers that have tended to be outright mean throughout the series' history, but every other type would also throw some playful jabs at you that could be surprisingly harsh. Over the years though, every personality type just got more and more nice. Even the cranky and snooty villagers, who are supposed to be mean and grumpy, just act more like they're having a mildly bad day in New Horizons. It just feels like the more Nintendo has given you power to completely control these animals' lives, the less these animals became willing to talk mad trash at you. What's even worse than the general softening up and homogenization of the personality types over the years, though, is that the animals no longer actually live their own lives. Yes, in New Horizons, animals have a wide variety of things they can do at any given time, but they're also able to be doing those things at any given time. Now, I completely understand this from an accessibility perspective. Not everybody is going to be able to play Animal Crossing during the daytime or early in the evening, so Nintendo made it so animals are always awake and doing things when you're playing, no matter what time that might be. 3 in the morning will be just as bustling as 3 in the afternoon. In a way, I appreciate that your neighbors will always be there and be accessible no matter when you play. At the same time though, it makes them feel even less like your neighbors who actually do things, like sleep, which is something they used to do in older games. New Horizons completely strips down the animals so much, letting you basically have control over their entire existences. You choose where they live, you choose how the area around their house is landscaped, they're always awake and active whenever you're active, they come to your town if you ask them to, and if they want to move somewhere else, you make the decision about whether or not they actually get to go. Combined with their relatively samey personalities, and the fact that they don't really directly interact with you as much as they did in previous games, and you slowly start to realize that this particular Animal Crossing might just be giving you a little too much power and control. You not only get to shape everything to be exactly how you want it to be, but you even get to have the final decision in who stays and who goes. It basically turns your island paradise into a diorama that you keep all of your pets caged inside. Once it hit me that I had so much power over these virtual creatures, it actually made me feel kinda bad. As a result, the number one thing I would absolutely love the next Animal Crossing to do, and this is a pretty big ask, I want there to be a story, and I want every single villager to have their own story. Not a single Animal Crossing game gives you any story outside of the absolute bare bones minimum. You move out to strike it on your own with practically nothing to your name. That's it. In New Horizons, they eventually add some stuff about Nook having connections with Blathers and Isabelle, and you get the famous musician KK to perform a concert on your island. But that's pretty much all you get. I don't even care if the player character doesn't have a story. Honestly, they don't need one. But give the series the Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley, every game with a social connection system in the role treatment. Give us a friendship mechanic with every single character in the game, similar to how you eventually learn about the Able sisters through talking to Sable every day for like 2 weeks. But make us work a little harder for it. Let us form up to like 10 hearts of friendship with each character, and we learn new stuff about them and they treat us a little differently every 2 hearts. Pick some villagers and decide they already have connections with each other that were made off screen, and give them special interactions if they both happen to be living in your town at the same time. Cater the various stories to the types of animals, like have Boomer the Penguin reveal that he attended flight school at the South Pole, or have Zucker the Octopus tell us about the time he won an eating contest because he was able to shove 8 pieces of food in his mouth at once. Give us a special little cutscene to round out achieving 10 hearts with a villager, where they give you the final piece of their story, thank you for being such a great friend, and give you their photo with a quote to always remember them by. I want to care about these animals beyond their aesthetics and their capacity to make me go, aw, that's cute. When you have so much scripted dialogue tailored to specifically fit only 8 personalities, there inevitably comes a time where nothing anybody says to you will have any impact anymore, because you've already seen that dialogue. Giving each character a unique story could help with that so much. And for those service animals, like Wilbur, who I mentioned earlier, it could do a lot to break up the monotony of talking to them by having them occasionally say new stuff and reveal the story to you as you become better friends with them. I feel that this would also help incentivize players to let animals move out. There are nearly 400 villagers in the game by now, but many players will find like the 10 they like the best and just keep them around forever, never letting them go and never really letting their town shift at all. Completing somebody's story can make it all feel so emotional too. You get to 10 hearts, your close friend gives you their picture to remember them by, and then a few days later, who knows, they may express a desire to move on and see more of the world. You feel close to this animal now, and chances are you have a genuine desire to want them to live their best life because you know so much about them. Throughout life comes some sadness, and you let your friend follow their dreams, and a couple days later, they're moved out. And then somebody else moves in. A new friend to meet, learn about, and grow with, and a new story to unfold. As for the animals that move away, they'll absolutely visit sometimes. Like, maybe every other week, and you can spot them in the city area as well. Though speaking of visitors, please let's stop with the one special visitor per day thing. Why can't we have Gulliver, Sahara, and Leaf all in one day? Some unlucky folks didn't see Red for the first time for weeks in New Horizons. He's a vendor character who sells you necessary items for the museum. At least have him visit a few times a week. Anyway, that's all I can come up with for right now. What do you think would be nice to see in the next Animal Crossing game? As big as my final points is on the list, considering how many mountains of cash Animal Crossing makes for Nintendo, I don't think it'd be too far outside the realm of possibilities to give every character a unique story. I know there are over 400 of them combined, but we waited 7.5 years between New Leaf and New Horizons. If the next game takes another 7.5 years, I think they could dedicate some of that time to creating a few hundred stories for these animals, most of whom have been around since 2001. If you enjoyed the video, and if you feel so inclined, I'd appreciate it if you could drop a like and if you could subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day.